Now the mix I'm going to use for the darker clouds is phthalo blue green shade. This is actually Windsor blue, but phthalo blue green shade. A little bit of quinacridone magenta, which will actually take the blue down to a more ultramarine type of color. And then a little bit of burnt sienna. And what I'm looking for is that nice sort of purpley color, well, almost a purpley color that you can see in the photograph. So that's a little bit more magenta. It takes a bit of time here just to get this right. Notice that I don't rinse my brush in between dipping into colors, because every time you would rinse your brush, you would add more water. So, and I don't want that. So that's me ready to go. That's going to be for the darker stuff. I have my little spray here, and I'm going to be using it to keep things moving if I need to. In fact, I'll just give that a little spray just to start with. That hasn't really wet the paper. It has just cooled it a little bit, and it'll give me a little bit more time. And I'll also get a little bit of kitchen roll, just to start to control things if I need to. So let's see, a bit more of that in it. Yeah, that's a little bit too neutral. I want it more purple than that. That's, I think, there, that's better. And really it's just getting some color on very simply. Then I'm going to get some of the warm light, and I'm just going to use burnt sienna for that, very weak burnt sienna, and just get that in underneath. Now essentially that's given me my first bank of cloud and then light, but I can add to the light by lifting out a little bit with my kitchen roll. Now let's see what that's looking like. Well, that's not too bad. If that's not working, which I'm happy enough with that, but if it wasn't, I could do another little spray, and that just softens everything again. So remember, your spray is sort of your rescue remedy type of thing. It's quite good. Some more of the dark then underneath that. Again, I'm trying to break things up a little bit. Now my burnt sienna has almost disappeared there. So what I'll do is I'll just take a little bit more. Now I have reasonable time to do this because I sprayed it beforehand and everything is very wet. That's the key. Very wet, paint wet. But I want some of this nice sort of orange tint of color in there. I'm going into the wet paint, and I'm going into the wet paint with stronger color than what is there, which is why I don't get runbacks or cauliflowers. If you go in with weaker paint, that's how you get the cauliflowers. Okay. A little bit more of this, no matter how much you make up, there's always insufficient. A little bit more, and then it breaks up quite a bit, so I'll maybe use the other brush for my burnt sienna. So I'm trying to get down to the bottom without leaving any white paper at all. And the reason for that is if I leave white paper on its own is just much too stark for well, for anything really, quite honestly. I rarely leave pure white paper. A little bit more dark there, and this is more to give me the nice contrast against the light that's going to be underneath here. Now I'll just have a quick check. Do I need to lift any stronger light out? Well, let's see. Let's try a little bit. So I'm lifting the light out at the top of the clouds. That's not too bad. And then just the burnt sienna underneath. Now, That's okay, but I'm not really getting the strong clouds in this area. So I'm going to go back in. I'm going to mix a little bit of stronger mix from that first mix. Now, because I'm having to continually mix a new pool of this, it means that every time I do it, it's slightly different, which is good actually, because all the colors in the sky are very, very different. And I'm going to use this just to get a little bit more of the dark clouds in there. Now remember, this has to be stronger than what is already there. And I want to try to get this nice bank of light at the bottom. I could probably use a little bit of that in there. I can see it's still wet, so I can get a little bit more in there. Okay. Now I pause and think. It's still wet, so I can still think. Let's try to get a little bit brighter light just out from just underneath that darker cloud. So I'm using the kitchen roll almost scrunched up, a little bit like a brush actually. So it's like this. And then just using the tip just to lift a little bit of light out. And that is looking okay. Notice I haven't dried that up yet, and there's a reason for that. Not sure why I did that. Didn't actually mean to, but well, I did. Now what I'm going to do is continue this first wash right down the paper, because again, if you look at the subject, you will see that the light and essentially the darks in the sky are reproduced on the water. So it makes much more sense to do that. So just nice, simple strokes. Actually, I'll use the bigger brush for this. A little bit more of the burnt sienna. Notice I'm painting over everything. I have my figure here. Ignore the figure. The figure is much darker than the background, so therefore the figure can be painted over the background. In watercolor we have this problem, of course, that we can't paint light over dark, but we can paint dark over light. So there isn't really a lot of point in leaving areas. I rarely leave areas, so I paint over everything and then worry about it later. And that's us with the first wash completed. All I'm doing, if you think about what man-made objects are like, they are essentially vertical and horizontal shapes, and that is really it. So I'm taking care to keep the bottom of this wash as straight as I can, and then the top I am essentially just going around the contour of the city. So anything I need to do, I'm doing it now. I don't want to go back into this because I don't want two layers. I just want a single layer. And it's far away. Remember, this is far away, so we don't need to be too precise about what everything is. Now over here, this is where this background area sort of disappears into the foreground areas. So what do? I don't really need to keep it going, but if I leave a hard edge, that may be visible because of the transparency of watercolor. That may be visible later on. So what do? Well, I just soften it. So I take my brush, my softening brush, try it a little bit. The key to softening is don't go straight to the edge. Put the brush on the paper, keep it on the paper, bring it up to the edge, soften it, bring it away, and lift. The reason why you bring it away before you lift is that little area there, there's a drip of water, And if I lifted my brush there, the drip of water would cause a cauliflower. Let's start this which going. Obviously we don't want. So in the distance, a few little indications of the lines. And then as we get a little bit closer, I think it's about there actually, there we go. Now we have some distant trees, but the trees, again, don't treat the trees as something different. The trees are simply, oh, that's a rubbish tree. Yeah, let's try that again. Maybe use the smaller brush for this. Don't treat the trees as separate entities, so just continue to add the shapes of the tree, similar to what we did with the skyline. That looks a bit strange, so what I'm going to do, if something looks a bit weird, don't panic, just take your brush, again the softening brush, and just soften this a little bit, just make part of it disappear, because that will give us two advantages. It will take away from the fact that it looks a bit strange, and also the softening helps to push it back, so it's a win-win situation for us here. It's all fairly low. In fact, quite like that softened area. I think I'll probably do a bit more of that, even whether I need to or not. But I would like to get a little bit of suggestion of the trees. Maybe a couple more little trunks. Now, when I say trunks, I'm not wanting to draw a great deal. That's probably as much as I want to do there. So we'll take that back, and then we're now into the realms of the closer headland. So I can afford to, as I did with the skyline, just soften this so that it disappears. So dot dash, try to create the variety there just by creating those slightly different lines. So what we're trying to suggest here are the rocks, but of course these at this distance you wouldn't be seeing little round rocks. You would be seeing, what we're seeing are lots and lots of rocks overlapping and together, which is why they appear to be these broken lines. Now that may be a little bit dark, but it will dry lighter. And then we have the bigger trees here. Now I think I'll use my little brush here. What I'm trying to get here is a sort of dry brush effect. And I'm holding my brush between my thumb and forefinger, and I'm just going to use a little bit of sideways motion of the brush, and that will give me a simple creation and suggestion of a tree. Now, because there's no greens or anything here, this hopefully will look like a winter tree, which is obviously what I'm looking for. So the little broken edge, the reason why this works is because the brush, of course, isn't made to release paint from the side. It's made to release paint from the tip. So it'll come very easily off the tip, not so easily off the side. That's okay. Take that across. Now at the bottom of that, we've got a little bit of a wall that I've sort of, as it happened, it's not that I've ignored it, but I've sort of just not done it. So how could we get a little bit of light out there? Yeah, well, there are a number of ways of doing it, but probably probably the simplest way is if you take a credit card or something similar and just wrap your kitchen roll around it. That gives you a nice absorbent edge, and that will just give me a very simple suggestion of the break in the seawall. If you look at the tone of the beach, you can see that I would say it's something similar to the tone of the skyline, in other words, the distant city. So in order to get that, what I'm going to do is just dilute this a little bit more and just, in fact, let's warm it up. Let's warm it up a little bit. And what I'm doing now is the shape of the beach. Again, ignoring the figures, or the figure. And trying to get just a nice shape to this. Now over here, there's a little bit of a lot of area where there are lots of little stones in, and one way I might be able to get that is if I just clean my brush from most of the paint, try to get a little bit of dry brush effect there. Hasn't worked too well, but I've got a couple of little bits and they'll do. They'll do. So that's my beach in. We'll get that dried because I need to start putting the rocks on top of it. So back to the rocks, and the rocks, as I say, they are so important, because it's the darkness of the rocks that will really suggest the fact that it's a sunset, really. So first of all, if we go along here to where I've just sort of done the beach there, we get a few little dots and dashes over there. So again, lots of little, the dots and dashes, it's important not to do these regularly. So if I did dot dash, that's going to look very strange because it will attract the eye. The eye is always attracted to regular shapes. So our eyes will be attracted there. So it's important to keep the variety. And I'm still not at the stage where I need really to be thinking about absolute rock shapes. It's really just, we're still just getting the horizontal lines at this point. When we get closer to the foreground here, we'll need to be thinking about actual rocks as opposed to just random blobs, I suppose. But these rocks do, if you look at the subject there, you can see just how many rocks there are. Now, as we get closer, it's also important to make sure that the bottom of the rocky parts are horizontal, because of course the bottom of the rocky parts are meeting the water, and the water is perfectly flat, so therefore the bottom of the rocks must be perfectly flat when they're in the water. We've got our little figure here, and I want to do the figure in two goes, as it were. So I'm going to roughly just get the silhouette of the figure in. And the important thing about figures is their proportions. And very roughly, from the feet to the top of the legs is roughly the same as from the top of the legs to the shoulders. And if you keep those sort of proportions, you won't ever be too far away. So we've got a figure there, and we have got their dog beside them. Now, I'm no dog expert, but simplest way to do a dog is, the dog lovers there are going to hit this probably, but just two lines, and then just fill in the center part, and maybe make the legs slightly thicker. And that is going to pass as a dog. Now, I don't want the figure isolated, and the reason I've done that now is that what I can now do is create a few more rocks that are the same tone as the figure. So this means that the figure doesn't jump out you. The last thing we want is for the figure to jump out. You can see quite clearly if you look at the figure there, the figure doesn't leap out at you because a lot of the tone of the figure is actually the same as the tone of the background. Now, if I do this too much, of course, if I painted rocks coming from everywhere, then obviously our figure would get lost. But so long as it's amazing how, oh, I probably lost my dog there. Oh well. It's amazing how much of this you can do, and yet the figure is still discernible. Base of the figure too, along there, the little dog. We'll get a sort of shadow underneath the dog. A few more little stones. Okay, how are we doing for time? Not too bad. So another little wash onto the figure just to give a little bit more modelling to the figure. I was dipping into ultramarine there, but I really didn't mean to, so I'll just... So really it's just those three colours. So that's the phthalo blue, the magenta and the burnt sienna, apart from when I dipped into the ultramarine accidentally. And with this I'm just going to use this to give us a little bit of variety in the figure. So there's a little bit of light just at her face and neck. Now, what I'd like to do there is just try to... I thought I might be able to leave that light, but I don't think I will. I think I'm going to need to darken that a little bit as well. Now I've done that, of course, then I need to do this little bit of merging again so that the figure doesn't jump out. And of course what I can do with this darker mix on my brush is that I can go into the previous dark areas and I can add a few more little bits of rock and stones. So again, we're getting tonal variety. Tonal variety is the key to your painting. Now I'm looking at my sky now and I'm wondering, is that dark enough? But it's not so light that I'll change it, but no, I think I'll leave it. So it's always a big risk going back into an area like that. Possibly even we could get, just to finish off, a tiny little bit of warmer tone. I was saying about how warm the colours in sunsets are, so we'll just get a little bit more of that burnt sienna. And just, again, just simply drop that in, nothing fussy. Not too much in the background. I want to save this warmer colour more for the foreground. Right. Now, if anyone has any questions, the board is tilted at about that much. Oh, yeah, sorry. Up. Let's see, that's horizontal. The board was tilted at about that. So about, what's that, 20, maybe 30 degrees, 40 degrees. I would normally actually keep it tilted more than that, because and that's one reason why I didn't use ultramarine, because when you use ultramarine on a reasonably flat sheet, it does cause that granulation, whereas if you have the sheet well tipped up at about 60 degrees, then it flows down nicely and you tend not to get the granulation. So but that was at about 40 degrees. The rosemary brush I was using was a size 14 and size 4 series 402. So that's a sable and synthetic blend, but it has a tapered point, lovely tapered point, very nice point on it. So that's that one. I was using Milford. I like St Cuthbert's Mill paper, so that's Milford, Saunders, and Bockingford that I'm sure most of the viewers will be familiar with. This particular one is Milford, which is one of their less well-known ones, and it's very good when you're doing soft, wet into wet areas. It creates lovely effects, and it's £140 knot surface. Well, the best and most useless advice I can give on that is that it's best to stop about 20 minutes before you actually do. Not a lot of help. When I get to the stage where I'm struggling to think what to do next, that's probably a good time to stop. Even if you're not necessarily, you can go back to it, but when you're getting to the stage where you're thinking, oh, I'm just dabbing here, I can't think what I'm really trying to do, that's the time to stop. Go off, have a cup of coffee, come back, and then decide, do you really, really need to do whatever it was you were going to do? That's what I would suggest. I'm assuming they mean just using Payne's grey as opposed to mixing it with something. Uh, yes, it would have the same effect tonally, but in terms of colour, the even though that was a sort of fairly neutral purpley grey I was using, Payne's grey isn't always a purpley grey. Different manufacturers seem to have a different blend for it. But the problem with using only one color is that then all those darks are only one color. So I would definitely suggest mixing your darks because you will always get much more lively darks that have a little bit of color in them, and that's always much better. Yes, arguably, yes, a little bit more warmth there would be better. Because if I just go back to that, you'll see I've got actually probably most of the warmth up there. I was saying about I was going to go back in and maybe try darkening some things, but I can use the same technique. I'll put a little bit more warmth in that just to let you see. So it's a touch of the burnt sienna again. Incidentally, burnt siennas also vary in colour. So this one is Winsor and Newton, and it is quite orangey. But what I can do here is if I spray that, let's see, it'll only take a second. I don't want any water getting below the horizon, but if I spray that a little, then I can introduce that slightly warmer tone. And of course, what it will do, because I've sprayed that, is that it will blend quite softly with everything. So if you pre-spray it, drop it in, and then what you need to do is keep an eye on it, because I'm not sure whether it's going to be too visible on the screen, but there's now a big drip of water down there. So I need to take a brush this is my lifting out brush, and it's almost dry. And I'm just going to run that across there once, okay, maybe twice. And that just dries that up. So what I get is the soft warmth down near the horizon. And I would have done the same thing if I'd been adding dark as well. So adding the dark, it's exactly the same thing. Pre-spray, add the dark. If if you try that and you get hard edges everywhere, it means you haven't sprayed enough. So just get your spray again, give it a good spray. If you think about it, the worst that can happen with the spray is that you will spray so much that you wash the sky off. And if that's the case, let it dry and do it again. So it's no great loss. Yes, well, depends what you mean by disaster, but every watercolor I paint has has problems with it. So this one had problems with it. Well, I didn't do the sky dark enough, so that was a problem. Uh, the what else happened? A few other. Oh yes, when I tried to do the splatter, it gave me big marks instead of small marks with the toothbrush. Still not sure why. That should have been smaller, but so you just have to expect these things with watercolor. The one sure thing about every watercolor painting that you paint is that it will go wrong. Every single one will go wrong. And what you have to be prepared is not thinking, oh, it's gone wrong, I have to fix it so that it does exactly what I want to do. Instead, look at it and think, okay, what have I done? Is there a, can I, if I leave it, is it a big disaster? So if it's not, then leave it. If it really is a disaster, then the little spray ball, because it spray of that can, it's a bit like an eraser. The when you're drawing, the spray bottle can work wonders.